So good evening. Today we are going to see the components of the motherboard. So we'll see what are the components are present in the motherboard. Okay. So actually this is a layout of the motherboard. The motherboard consists of an PCI extension slots, chipsets, CMOS batteries, and BIOS, basic input and output system, and also it has a case fan power supply connector for keeping the temperature of the computer or the laptop in control, and the processor support. Okay, so we know that with processor help only our computer or laptop will work, no? So this is the processor support, and this will be your motherboard power supply connector. Okay, so there should be a power supply to the whole whole motherboard also, no? So this is the motherboard power supply connector, and these are the input and output connectors. So we will give inputs like a keyboard, mouse, right? So those are the input and output connectors. Input devices are like keyboard and mouse. And what are the output devices? Output devices are like printer, monitor. So these are all connected in the output connectors. Output devices are connected in the output connectors, and input devices are connected in the input connectors. Okay, so it has an audio chip, okay, and PCA extension slots. So why we need the extension slots? So in order to increase our memory. Okay, so when we buy the laptop, it has some memory only. After that, if we are using more, then we need extendable memory, no? So for that extension, PCA extension slots will be there, and chipset and BIOS, CMOS battery, and RAM connectors. Okay, here also RAM connectors. So for extending the RAM. Okay, and processor power supply connector and processor support chipset 1. Okay, and a case fan power supply connector, and these are the disk drive and floppy drive connectors. Okay, disk drive and floppy drive connectors, for what purpose we use? We use the disk drive and floppy drive connectors for our permanent memory, right? So for that purpose we will use the disk drive and floppy drive connectors and jumpers. So we know that BIOS means the basic input and output system. Okay, so now we will see all of these components individually. Okay, so we'll see the components of motherboard. So in block diagram we have seen what are the components of motherboard. We know that components of motherboard are very important, because motherboard, without motherboard the laptop or computer will not work, right? So motherboard is also known as, we call motherboard as other name as main board. Okay, so motherboard is also known as a main board or logic board. It is a very crucial component on the computer system. Okay, motherboard or logic board, other name for motherboard is logic board. It is very crucial component in a computer system. Okay, so using motherboard only all the components will work. So for CPU is the heart of the computer. For CPU, motherboard is the heart of the computer. Okay, so it serves as a central platform that connects all the components and enables the communication between. Means it will able to make communication between various hardware components. Okay, it can able to make communication between various hardware components. Okay, so it has a, if you see the components, it has a CPU socket. Okay, so motherboard has a CPU socket. So what is this CPU socket? the CPU socket is where the central processing unit is installed on the motherboard. CPU socket is nothing but where the central processing unit is installed on the motherboard. Okay, so it provides connection and interface between the CPU and the rest of the system. What is the use of this CPU socket? Means it enables us to interact or connect between rest of the system and the CPU. Okay, so it forms as it interfaces with CPU and other components of the system. Okay, what is CPU socket means? It interfaces with CPU and other components of the system. Okay, so that is the main use of the CPU socket. So next we have seen the RAM slots. Okay, so what is RAM? Random access memory. So why we use RAM means RAM is nothing but a temporary memory, right? And it is a volatile memory. Volatile memory means what? When we switch off the when we switch off the computer, the RAM memory will be lost, whereas ROM memory will not be lost. It is a permanent memory. Okay, RAM is a volatile memory and it is also known as a temporary memory. Okay, so what are RAM slots? So the motherboard has multiple slots where random access memory modules can be installed. So before we have seen no RAM slots, so in that RAM slots we can install the random access memory. Okay, so as the name indicates, it is a random access memory. Randomly we can access memory, so it is a temporary memory. Okay, temporary storing data and instructions that the CPU needs to access quickly. So it is like for example, it is like buffer. What in buffer it will store, which we access more frequently, those will be stored in the buffer. So in the same way, RAM will also acting as a buffer memory, means temporary memory, means which are randomly accessible will be stored in that RAM. Okay, so next, expansion slots. That is about RAM slots. Okay, next is the expansion slots. So what are these expansion slots? So what are these expansion slots, ma? Expansion slots means the slots allow for the installation of expansion cards. Okay, so expansion cards means like any external cards for producing the graphics. So we can use the graphic cards. In this expansion cards, we can install the graphic cards, sound cards, network cards and other add-on components. Okay, any add-on components we can add in this expansion slots. Okay, so generally we use the PCI. PCI means peripheral component interconnection slots. So in expansion slots, those are nothing but PCI. Peripheral means what? External devices or external cards. Okay, so external PCI means peripheral components okay, peripheral components interconnection. Okay, those are the expansion slots. Okay, so next are the chipset. Okay, so in components of motherboard we have seen the CPU socket, RAM slots and expansion slot. Next are the chipset. So what is this chipset, ma? Chipset is nothing but is a collection of, the chipset is a collection of integrated circuits. Okay, chipset is a collection of integrated circuits. What are integrated circuits? ICs, right? So the chipset is a collection of integrated circuits that control various functions of the motherboard. Okay, chipset, it is a collection of various integrated circuits okay. So chipset, it is a collection of various integrated circuits that control various functions of the motherboard, that controls okay. What is a chipset? It is a collection of various integrated circuits that controls the functions, various functions of the, that controls various functions of the motherboard. Okay, it is a, that is about chipset. Okay, next is the BIOS chip. Next is the BIOS, or what is the other name? UEFI chip. So what is BIOS chip? We have already seen in last class, no? What is BIOS and UEFI? BIOS means what? Basic input output system. Okay, means when you are switch on the CPU, switch on the computer or your laptop, the first program which runs in the computer is the BIOS. Okay, BIOS or the UEFI. BIOS means basic input output system or unified extensible firmware interface. Unified extensible firmware interface. UEFI means unified extensible firmware interface. Okay, so it provides the essential instructions for the computer to boot up and communicate with hardware. Okay, so in mind you have to keep that BIOS is the first program which runs on the computer when you immediately switch on your computer. Okay, in simple. Okay, next are the connectors or ports. Next is the connectors or ports. So why we use the connectors or ports, we know, right? So motherboard, generally motherboard will come with various connectors and ports, okay, to interface with external devices. How we are connecting our keyboard, video outputs, audio jacks, Ethernet connections with these connectors and ports only, no? Otherwise we can't get the interconnection with the motherboard. Using these connectors and ports only we can connect our external devices with the computer system. Okay. So motherboard, when manufacturing only, motherboard is manufactured with different ports and connectors for connecting the external devices, for connecting the audio jack, speakers, if you want external speakers, okay, and USB ports. So you will keep the pen drive, no? Yes, and USB ports, Ethernet ports, video outputs, all these can be provided using the connectors and ports only. So next are the power connectors. So what are power connectors? We know that for any electronic device, power should be there. So how the power will be supplied means, using these power connectors only we can supply the power to the motherboard or the computer system. Okay. The primary connectors are, the primary power connectors are 24 pin ATX power connector. Okay. So that is 24 pin ATX power connector with a 4 or 8 bit CPU power connectors. Okay. CPU power connectors. So next is the storage interface. Okay, this one over. So what is this storage interface? So we all are using these computer systems or laptops mainly for our storage only, right? So for performing actions with the storage. Okay, motherboards provide interfaces for connecting storage devices like hard disk drives and solid state drives. Okay, so for main purpose is storage, right? So for that purpose we should have the storage interface with the hard disk drives and the solid state devices. Okay, because we can take the external memory also, no? So for storage it should provide a storage interface. Okay, next is the clock generator. Next component is the clock generator. So what is this clock generator? The clock generator on the motherboard produces timing signals. Okay, the clock generator on the motherboard will produce the timing signals that synchronize the operation of various components. Means it synchronizes with the CPU and RAM. Okay, so if you are giving one instruction, so if it takes a long time, you will be, or the loading time is more, means you will be bored, no, and you will not show any interest of using that system, right? So clocks should be there, and the response of the clocks or the system should be more, then only you can use fastly and you can get the results fastly, right? So so next is the CMOS battery. Next component is the CMOS battery. So what is this CMOS battery? So CMOS battery is a small battery that provides power to the motherboard. CMOS battery means it provides power to the motherboard is the CMOS battery. Okay, so CMOS means what? Complementary metal oxide semiconductor battery. CMOS means complementary metal oxide semiconductor battery. So using this battery only, it provides a small battery to the motherboard. Okay, so when the power is off suddenly, what happens if you don't have the USB also? What happens, ma? You don't have the USB also, using this CMOS battery only, you will get the backup time, okay, until you shut down your laptop, right? So this CMOS battery will act as a backup when you don't have power in your home or in your office, okay. So CMOS battery will provide the backup power to you. Okay, CMOS means what? Complementary metal oxide semiconductor. Okay, it is one of a semiconductor device. Okay, next are the so these are all the components of the motherboard. So what are the components we have seen from first? So first is the CPU socket, RAM slots, expansion slots, chipset, and also BIOS chip or UEFI chip, and connectors and ports, power connectors, storage interfaces, clock generators, CMOS batteries. So all these are the components of the motherboard. These are the main important components of the motherboard. Using these components only the motherboard is working. When motherboard works only, we can operate in our computer systems. Okay, that's all.